Thank you very much for having us here this afternoon.
That's our pleasure. Take it away.
Well, we at CTD, like educators across the state, have been hearing from families about their anxiety and their concerns and their best intentions to partner with educators to do the best they can for their learners at home. So one of the things we've been hearing is that, here we go. Is that they are feeling pressure to recreate school in their homes. They feel like suddenly it's their job, but they don't necessarily understand everything about what school looks like day to day for their child. They need a good working understanding in order to be an effective partner for educators. So they may be imagining that school looks just like it did when they were in school, which is a range. You know, it could have been not too long ago, or it could be quite a while ago that they were in school. So we've been hearing, I hear this, you know, from celebrities, from, you know, people I know. They feel like suddenly they're a teacher, and they value teachers quite a bit because they understand how hard, they're starting to get a sense of how hard it is. But I think I bump on that every time I hear it, because their children are learning at home, but they are not suddenly teachers. Rhoda, have you heard similar things?
Right. So Beth, very recently a parent said to me, you know, my child like is lounging on the beanbag in her room with a you know, she doesn't even look comfortable. Her body's all scrunched up and she has this computer. And I thought, well, that's what a CTD classroom could look like. But, you know, you might see students on the floor collaborating. You may see them lying down, coloring near their noses. But she was thinking of education as at a desk or in a group at a table. So it was hard for her to give that up and to say, don't worry. Don't worry about how the learning is taking place. So I think those kinds of things a parent looks at just on a simple level like that and thinks, well, this isn't education. As you said, not realizing what a contemporary school classroom looks like. So that's the first thing we wanted our first piece of advice is to make clear to parents who the teacher is.
Mm-hmm. Right, so as they attempt to step into that role without necessarily having a clear idea, the first thing educators can do to support them is to let them know we've got it covered in terms of the teaching, we've got the curriculum, we've got the instructional practices. There is plenty for you to do as an at-home support, as a parent, but it's not teaching. It's okay if you don't feel comfortable in the role of a teacher. So that kind of reassurance can help to distress things at home, which is important. And just to remind them, there's definitely a role for them. There's plenty to do without feeling like you have to suddenly have the skills of a professional teacher. So we want to talk a little bit about what are those roles and like really break it out so that you can maybe respond and hear some things that will resonate with you in the parents that you interact with, and ways to express these ideas that might be parent friendly and offer them some reassurance. First of all, is there an appropriate role for parents to be the cheerleader? And by this we mean the general positive reinforcement that, you know, you can get them. One of the things I like to, you know, say and help people to remember is, you know, you're built for this. You have everything that you need right now in order to meet these challenges. You can do it. I think people need reminding of that more frequently than we realize. A second important role is to be a coach. And by this, we don't mean determining the goals necessarily, because those might be instructional or curriculum based, but what we mean is the role of coach in terms of providing pep talks and also keeping the focus on what's important. I mean, a coach is there reminding you what's really important about the environment you're in right now, whether it's the playing field or, you know, the running track or wherever coaches are coaching. And also focusing on the how, the technique, as opposed to the what. So, you know, how you're going to get where you're going. When you're an athlete, you know, you work on technique and you let the wins follow after you have good technique in place. And that's what coaches can bring to the table. To elaborate a little bit more on the role parents can play, organizational aid. Now, this is a familiar role for parents. They may feel like it's somehow very different, and in some ways it will be different with online learning. We want them to focus on prioritizing tasks, which might be harder to do when kids aren't moving in and out of a classroom with tasks written on the board for them to cue them. So there's a role there for parents to provide those cues. Helping to break the work into manageable pieces so that it can be addressed by students given where they are and how they work, that those real specific parts of a learner's profile. And also providing checklists and rewards, which is also will pertain to that particular child in how they work, you know, how they work, which is actually a nice opportunity to be able to lean into, which might be a little tougher to do in a classroom with, you know, 20 or so children.
And Beth, I think that the nice thing about this is that I love that this is entitled organizational aid, because they're not the organizer. So particularly for high ability or gifted students, this is one area where we know involving the student in making their own schedule is a part of the education, right? And so they really, really will stick to that if they had and feel the ownership of having made that schedule. So saying, we're going to be doing this from 9 to 12, not a good idea, but being the organizational aid to say, do you need a notebook to put down your schedule, or do you want to get a project management system that you can help me research online and purchase, or does the LMS have one? How do you as the student want to go about doing this? I'm just here to help make sure that soccer's there and this is there, or, you know, whatever the items are that need to be fulfilled. So I think that that's really important for gifted students, and it might really be the high ability students who struggle most with this, and particularly as they enter middle school. Arlen, I know you've been keeping track of how many people here are middle school instructors or administrators, but we do know that because they may have sailed easily through elementary school without much work, and lots of rewards, they may, at the point where work gets hard and work is necessary, right? Homework is necessary and drilling is necessary, they may get to the point where they don't have the executive functioning skills as solidly developed as some students who've been having to practice those along the way. So that's a really nice thing a parent can do, is to be the aid, but not to take it over.
Exactly. Another role parents can fulfill is on-site tech support, which they've had to learn to do their jobs from home maybe, but maybe they'll need to add some skills to their own tool belt for this. But allowing your student to focus on their learning means that maybe you are becoming a bit of an expert on the learning platform that that your school district has chosen. So you're now the person who can help them navigate that and help to keep that distraction and frustration, you know, although it's good to learn how to cope with those things, that doesn't need to be the focus of their day, right? We can provide them with the tech support. Things like that are particular to your environment, like, well, how is your Wi-Fi doing? Making sure that that's in place. And if there's a time of day when it's not going to be great, then helping your child to know that and to schedule around it. If there are any hardware issues, just being the tech person in your household is an important supportive role. Rhoda mentioned this briefly, but scheduling, and I say scheduling partner, parents can be that role of partner for their child. And again, there are lots of different tools that help make this possible. Some of those might be familiar and you're just gonna, you know, pivot and use those in this different learning setup. Or you might need a different kind of planner, like an online planner, or maybe the student never used that kind of a planner at all. Maybe they never wrote things down, but now that becomes more important because that they need that support, because math doesn't happen every day at 1 o'clock, but we still need to plan for math. So those details need to be supported. And in this sense, go ahead.
Sorry, Beth, we've had a couple of questions come in so far regarding this piece of the presentation. I thought I'd let you address them.
Mm-hmm.
Walter asks, how do you successfully partner with parents online when many of the homes are without electronic devices?
Yeah, well, I would assume that there might be some district resources that can be tapped to help those families, reach their school districts or reach their teachers. So I'm not sure that we're prepared to answer all of that level of, particularity around the state.
Right. So I would say that we know that access to Wi-Fi and access to devices is during this time, and perhaps from now on moving forward, one of the big issues around equity in schools. And there are some districts that have, of course, as we've seen, they're parking buses with hotspots in them in parking lots for students to learn. So now, is that ideal? That some students we're talking about which room of the house should a student be working in, whereas there are students who are sitting, in colder weather than right now, on fold-out chairs near a bus to get the hotspot. So this is definitely the hot number, but a hot issue in equity, and I think that it cannot be solved school by school so much as these are resources at the district level. So I don't know if that helps, but I know that there are districts that have been working with AT&T, for instance, to get Wi-Fi to everyone's homes in the district who doesn't have it. And I've heard of districts who've encountered issues even with that extra step that they've taken, because AT&T or Comcast, whoever it was, said, that's fine, but it doesn't extend to people who still owe us money on some other account they once had. And so the school districts have had to sort of take that into account in areas with low-income students and find other ways to get Wi-Fi to them. But yes, that is a huge issue. And what I want to be clear about is that we do think that that's a huge major issue, and it does have to be dealt with at the level of district and resources that the district has to put towards that, or makes the decision to put towards that. Whereas what we're trying to talk about is the teachers the parents who are sort of needing perhaps to step back and let you do your work with your student, and in a situation where the student does have Wi-Fi and electronic devices. Does that make sense, Arlen?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. And Diane, another follow-up to this part of the presentation is, how would you work with families that may not have these skill sets that you're introducing?
Lovely question. So a little bit later on, we are going to deal with, because this is a new shared language, and so we do think that you'll see later on, we do feel like there are some things that a district or a school should do up front, which is at least to send information home with families so that they can get into an initial Zoom meeting or something in order to go through some of these skills and language issues around the district shared language about what a parent's role is going to be. Beth, did you have something to add to that?
No, yeah, I was just going to say that might be something that we have some ideas on the tip sheet, might be a source, to get some juices flowing and thinking about that as you bring information back to the teams that you work with.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you both so much for addressing those.
Okay.
And Arlen, of course, we can also put some resources. I can definitely make resources available of things I've read around this, but it's really more an outline of an overview of the problem And I'm only hearing from individual districts on the solutions, like what the extra steps are that they've taken to try to negotiate with big companies like AT&T and Comcast, etc. But they're not, best practices. They're more like what individual districts have been doing anecdotally.
One thing I do want to say about that too, pardon me, is that this skill set, building a skill set, as we know, that means that's available for the future, right? So when you do take the opportunity to work with parents and front load some skills to support online learning, those are skills that are going to be available for them to support their learners in whatever setting. They're not going to be restricted to an online setting. We do have to, maybe it's a little bit different, but some of the basic ideas of that we're going to hit on are, growing the autonomy of the learner, supporting them, but not leaving them completely on their own. Those are things that will be part of the dynamic that hopefully benefits will come throughout learning, whether it's online or hybrid or back in the classroom.
Right. Right. In fact, I just had a parent who said to me, all right, it's harder than I thought. This teaching thing is harder than I thought. I didn't make any headway. He will not listen to me. 6 years old, wouldn't listen to me until I realized that he wanted to be the teacher. And this may well be one of the cases where the students can show their parents around the learning management system as well. And it can be a nice sort of cooperative effort of parents learning some things and students providing some information as well that they have as digital natives.
Just to make one more point before we move on from this particular topic of scheduling, that scheduling and trying things out and getting it wrong, like making a schedule that you're deferring maybe to your students or allowing parents, giving them permission to go ahead and let the kids be the boss a little bit and determining what their schedule is going to be, within reason, and not to expect them to do it the same way that they might do it as an adult. That developmentally appropriate means getting it wrong sometime and learning it from that and trying again next week, or, so to leave a little room for things to not work out exactly how we can see as adults what the best case scenario would be. That's maybe not going to be how it goes, and that's okay too. That's how classrooms run too. I wanted to move on and talk a little bit more about space. And Rhoda, you mentioned this earlier about when you mentioned the beanbag chair and just finding a comfortable space. Did you want to say anything more about that?
Right, that it's really not it's not as a parent, the point isn't to designate a space and what it should look like. And I know, Beth, in conversations with you, this worried me as a parent too, right? Why isn't he sitting up straight? Why is he slouching around, in the classroom when I went to visit? And it's everything you can do as a parent not to say something, but it's really not important. As an educator, we know it's just not important. So the opportunity for parents is to say, back away. It is your place to find a comfortable space and a room, a quiet room perhaps, but how the student decides to sit in that space or be in that space is really let them make it their own. Again, it's the obvious point of a student will learn better if they have some autonomy and feel that they have agency in the learning process.
Right, and I think it's a little ironic that many elementary school classrooms are going out of their way to find homey, cozy nooks and corners to their classroom to allow their students to feel comfortable. And at home, that's easier to come by. And sometimes there's resistance to that because it's not school-like enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So some things for parents to keep in the back of their minds, things that we can use as touch points for parents. Self-starters need room to run. So if yours is the 6-year-old who wants to be the boss and is going to resist other attempts to structure too much, then listen to that. When you see that, take that as feedback. An instructor would do that. You can support them by bringing the fun sometimes. Sometimes we do that at school, right? We are often trying to insert something fun or a treat or a little break, and that's okay to do at home. We don't have to resist that at home. In fact, too many restrictions can get in the way and just cause pushback, right? If there's something to push against, some students will always do the pushing.
Mm-hmm. And in the same way, Beth, I think that, schools can really tap into the parents who are already advocates for the school. So dig into your parent leadership team, whether that's a PTO, a gifted parent group, or an individual parent who is tapped into your classroom and has brought a lot of positive energy to it in the past. Because I think that if parents can keep one another going, it's been such an enormous change. If you can use that parent to get your message out, or to amplify your message in some way, and also to hear what parents' concerns are, that's just one more way to do it. So using those parent leaders is a good idea as well as one touch point.
Mm-hmm. So just to sum that up, what is acceptable, what parents may not realize is that, they accept it as time well spent in school, doing different things. They might find that intolerable at home, and they need to sort of readjust those expectations. A regular school day involves transition time, assemblies, movement time, celebrations, and all of those things are not, we don't treat them as distractions and as a negative in the physical school environment, and they don't have to be a negative at home either. They're not to be eliminated to make way for learning. They can be managed, enjoyed, support the whole child as a way to support learning. So
right.
Parents may need to remember non-lesson time is still learning time, and it's still positive and important for their child. Did you want to add something?
Right. I've heard so many parents saying, well, this isn't a 9 to 3 day, but a 9 to 3 day isn't a 9 to 3 day in those terms either. So just understanding, if helping a parent get onto the same page about shared language around how much of a school day is really spent with those transitions that are during which time learning consolidation happens. It isn't wasted time. Beth, I know you and I had this great experience on a playground once where we walked out of a classroom, right, a math classroom, which didn't have anything to do with butterflies, and this huge, was it a moth? This huge, enormous moth, we had to Google what kind of moth, huge, was there, and it turned into an entire other lesson, right? It doesn't have to. They could have just played, and the playing would have been guided, and they would have been learning through that too. But a different kind of learning can happen informally with a handheld device and a moth. So just to be more relaxed about where learning occurs, and that ground isn't being lost necessarily because students aren't in school from 8 to 3.
Right, and also that there can be a role for parents in facilitating the social time, even if it has to be online. Like, go ahead and set up, Zoom meetings, or don't try to keep those out of the day necessarily. They are a natural part of, social context is really important in learning, and it is important in online learning as well. And even if there's not a learning goal attached to it, because they're all Zooming they're in the same classroom together, you can support their growth socially by facilitating that kind of social time as well.
Right, and Beth, that's another thing we've heard, and I'd be interested, Arlen, to know if what we're hearing is the same thing that school teachers are hearing in their regular classrooms, but we've heard a lot like, no, my child just spent all day online, we're not going to do more online, and parents sort of really confused about how much is enough, and so the part that they may take away in the name of balance might precisely be the social interaction that the child needs to learn better. So so just remembering and helping parents with those items is important, I think.
Yeah, Catherine had a question on this topic. She says, during remote learning, would you advise me to schedule Zoom classes daily, Like, would it be helpful to parents to know that we'll meet at a Zoom for math class from 9 to 10, and then a reading class from 10:30 to 11:30?
Mm-hmm. So, so Beth, I'm just going to start, and then please feel free to jump in. So, you know, we thought a lot about this, and the issue here is that some districts really have policies around this. That there will be a circle time for little students. There will be a starting synchronous class, and then a check back in later. And what we would say is it really depends. You know your community best. So that's a really great way to organize it if you know that everyone can be available then. If you have students whose parents typically are doing night shifts and they're going to be coming home exhausted and not able to help students log in at 9, maybe it's not a good thing, right? So it depends on who your population is and who your school body is and what the demographics are. But definitely long, and also we also know that for high ability students who are self-starters, they can get that moment. It doesn't have to be a long moment, but they can get that direct instruction and then go for quite some time until they need that timely feedback, moment of timely feedback, so that they, you know, at the different forks, they know where to go. But other than that, they can really work asynchronously on their own or organize small groups with their fellow students. These are all different options. And if your students have left town to go somewhere else to shelter in place, and I don't know how that is for some of you, but just taking account of the difference in times can be difficult to schedule synchronous things. But yes, a mix of synchronous and asynchronous is, I think, a good idea. Beth, did you want to add to it?
Just that communication up front about what it's going to be is always, I think, well received by parents. If you determine, you know, if you take a poll or you're able to determine that it's doable for your families to do 10 a.m., you know, we'll meet for an hour and that will be language arts time, or that will be, you know, English class. They do appreciate having that, you know, like communicating directly to them and being able to predict and schedule their time around it as well, as workers at home or as people who may be leaving to work in essential businesses. So, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit more about framing the synchronous versus asynchronous, you know, the values around that. But the important piece is the communication, you know, being clear with them about what's going to happen. And it's not all going to happen all the learning doesn't happen in the Zoom session, right? In the face-to-face time. So we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Right on the next slide, perhaps.
Right, so just to recap, you know, in an actual classroom, there's noise, there's movement, there's kids in different positions doing different things, and that is entirely appropriate. And we, you know, we don't think of that as a problem in the classroom, and we don't want parents to feel like that's a problem when they're at home either.
Right. Right. I think the other thing is that to this point that Beth was just raising is that a parent might think there's a lot more direct instruction in a 21st century classroom than there is. And so it might help you in thinking through that question of synchronicity to remind parents about 21st century education and how it is project-based. There are often students working in small groups together without any direct feedback. There may be a student completely and absolutely actively engaged in something on his or her own in the classroom, on the floor, these or at a desk. And these, the direct instruction is not for an hour sitting down necessarily at desks and all eyes on that teacher in the front. And so it needn't be online either. And to reframe that for a parent, instead of thinking about it in terms of time, well, your district gets the 1 hour, but we don't get the 1 hour, you know, what's best practice, but really just to show parents that there are a variety of best practices as far as instruction goes. And for this particular topic and for this particular project, you've thought about what's best practice for that rather than writ large. And I think that that will help as well.
Right. So just to recap a little bit what you're saying there, instructors are planning. They're spending a lot of their time planning. Maybe there's a mini lesson to kick something off, but a lot of what they're doing in the classroom is facilitation as opposed to direct instruction. As you know, it's about asking the well-timed questions. And as you plan, as your teachers plan their online curriculum, they'll insert those opportunities for well-timed open-ended questions. That'll still be a piece of the instruction that they're doing. It doesn't necessarily need to be attached to FaceTime. It might be. And also providing feedback. There are ways to do that. I mean, online platforms allow for instructors to give feedback at the critical moment as a project is developing, or to guide students without, without taking away their agency, the real important part of their learning process. So those are things that you're, of course, familiar with, but they may not, because they're so second nature to how you go about running your classrooms, or your teachers are running their classrooms, you might forget. You need to articulate that to the families, because we are hearing a lot from our families about what is the time that my child needs to be in the classroom, even when the courses that we're offering are asynchronous. And we have the expectation for the parents, we're finding, is that because they would have been in the classroom with the teacher, the online platform should be the same amount of time with the teacher in FaceTime. And it just belies a real misunderstanding of what teachers are doing most of the time anyway. They're doing facilitating, they're the guide alongside. They're not necessarily, standing there and delivering a lecture. If they are doing that quite a lot, then maybe they need to add some more approaches to their instructional practices, but we don't usually see a lot of that direct instruction for a lengthy period of time. So just to shake loose parents of that idea that that's what they need to be seeking out for good learning opportunities.
Right. Arlen, are there questions that we should address?
One question here: how do you address parent concerns with early childhood, where they feel like they have to spend way more time with their children and the projects because they're unsure of the child's ability to work on their own?
Right. Well, I think that's true. There will be more time and more support necessary for very young learners than you will find is needed for your older learners. I'm not sure that there's a one single way to deal with that. I mean, of course, early childhood educators appreciate the kind of support that that young children need in the classroom. But there are certain things that may be translatable to home that you could help your parents try to do, and that the simple things that are a part of the school day that include movement breaks, song, motion, those you can give your parents tools to try to insert those into their child's with a predictable kind of rhythm that provides the comfort and the familiarity, so that they can feel like they are connected, because the Zoom connection is not, or the face-to-face time, whatever platform they're using with young children. I mean, they will get up and run away, right? They're not going to be sitting down staring at their peers necessarily, for the amount of time they would in their circle time. So it's hard to bring circle time to the online setting. I know a lot of early childhood places have tried that to varying degrees of success, but some of the aspects of early childhood education, you can give some tools and some guidance to families to do those, and it won't take all day to do them, but to give them some key features, like be sure to include song, be sure to include movement, be sure to include hands-on. These are the types of questions to involve. Whether or not you finish the project isn't so much the point as engaging with the focus of the project and why they're coming at it. Talking about that's really the point. Did you want to add any more to that, Rhoda?
We did Beth and I did a webinar to parents on the weekend about guided play, and so the opportunity, sometimes it's I think instructive when to give parents something that they can do in the home, in the kitchen, some kind of science experiment in the kitchen that they can do, so that the lab aspect of early childhood goes into the home and parents don't have to feel that everything is happening online or that they don't know what their children are learning, but just to say, if you can do this experiment in the kitchen and have your child count it out and have your child group the numbers and or the different kinds of items in the kitchen, that is helpful. So giving them the offline activities so that may be helpful. And maybe, you know, with early childhood, you really are teaching the parents to help their students just as much as you are teaching the student directly. But helping the parent understand the offline activities that can be done and to recognize it as good learning.
And I mean, we talked about this on Saturday, there's so much research that supports the important learning that happens during guided play, that they shouldn't feel like, you know, play is not good learning time. It absolutely is, you know, the best learning time. So if we have resources on that we'd be happy to share, that if that would be helpful in communicating with parents. So just to recap some touch points, as you, as parents are doing this, you know, as they're understanding what their roles, appropriate roles should be, one of the things that they can do that is not being the teacher is to keep an eye on their students' interest, to really clock where's the passion for my own child. It doesn't mean that they're not going to do they're not going to address the other academic areas in their curriculum. It just means that here's a place where the parent can really lean in and really emphasize and allow the student to get even more excited. So when you see where that interest is, that's how you can inspire the curiosity and the discovery. You see the opportunities there. And also these just support the more and more independence as a learner, owning your own learning and being responsible for that, and all those other things we mentioned earlier, support that and contribute to that. But also as a parent, and this is something that's not new to the online setting, but setting those expectations high. And that might mean threading the needle a little bit between letting students make mistakes and also saying, you know, it's okay to try again. What do you think about trying again? Or maybe you want to revise this. The project didn't work out how you wanted. It's okay to try again. You know, if you feel like you can do better, let's do better. You know, set those expectations high without taking away the child's autonomy. And I know that's that can be a little bit tricky, but I mean, parents are in a great position to know where their child, where their strengths are and where their passion can motivate them to do better and to do more.
Right. This is probably the one time to really get across to parents about help them with their strengths. You know, like let them soar with their strengths and not try to be on the lookout for gaps, perceived gaps in knowledge, but really let them use this as a time to develop their own passion, the children's own passions.
Right. So like I said, it's not that they're not going to address all those academic areas, but this is a place a parent can really do something important to support those passions. So just to, you know, to make it very clear to parents that the school is a learning context and home is a learning context. And there are interruptions and intrusions, we might say, in both, but those aren't necessarily problems to solve. They're part of the context, and that's okay. And so once the basic time management agreements are in place, you don't have to play the role of learning police. You know, supportive parent, a partner in education is not necessarily being the learning police. And a lot of parents will feel like that's hard to hear, or they feel like if I try hard, this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to be, you know, redirecting. But the upfront work of collaborating with a student to plan their time can be difficult, but that's where the effort should be. Once again, we mentioned this earlier, but we hear from a lot of parents that the message we're hearing is that FaceTime is learning time, and that they need to get a little bit more information about when learning actually happens. So to try to really come at and address that issue, not to take away FaceTime with instructors, because that's a good tool, but it's just one of their tools. So we want to make sure that that misconception is disrupted for families. And really, you can do that by highlighting how your students are still members of their learning communities. So bring that home in whatever ways you find you can. Communicate to your parents that you are already providing opportunities for visual, auditory, and hands-on learning, even when those activities are not inclusive of FaceTime. So that's where the learning is happening, when they're listening, when they're doing, when they're exploring, that's when learning is happening, whether or not the teacher is present on their screen.
Mm-hmm. And Beth, I was just thinking also that one of the things we've discussed as well is that I think parents may also help teachers to reframe for parents what an assessment looks like. So an assessment isn't as just a summative test at the end of a semester, but just the awareness that to bring to a parent that educators are pre-assessing and assessing throughout a class to check for understanding, and that it may not be in an assignment, it may not be in an end of semester quiz, it might be, a discussion thread with fellow classmates filled with typos and age-appropriate typos and incomplete thoughts. But the way in which the students are articulating there tells the instructor something of their understanding. So the parent may not know that the instructor is checking for understanding all the way through and has those different is using a variety of methods online to check that understanding. They may just see the discussion group and see the typos, and worry about that instead of worrying where they don't need to, because the teacher's already checking for understanding, conceptual understanding.
Right. So we wanted to offer a few specific strategies that you might use to partner with parents. So one of the things about good partnerships is that effective partnerships, each partner knows the ground rules, and they're both, aligned in what the goals are. So there's a lot of sharing up front to make that happen. Rhoda mentioned earlier the option of like a parent training video, using the learning platform to convey what it is you want parents to do. And, we have some more, some details on that, but we're getting a little bit close to the end, so I'm going to, run through this a little bit quickly. Keep in mind, there will be parents with kids with special needs or accommodations, that those might be the parents who have, I think that this could go either way, actually. They may have the most anxiety about their child's needs being met, or they might feel like, okay, I can do this because I know what they need. And the real challenge was getting the school environment to be able to accommodate my child. So I think this might sort of split a little bit. But in either case, the clear communication is upfront is really important.
I agree with that. I think also from the district, if you are in a large district, having that training module be at the district level is super important for all schools to know that we're all on the same page, and this is the language we use, and this is the role of parents, and this is where you go for these resources. So maybe even if there is a learning management platform, making a course within it for parents. The parent role is clearly laid out there, and they get a sense of what a class looks like for their student in the learning management platform.
Right, and they get a experience of what it means to have that check for understanding that you were just referring to.
Right.
Finally, in a good partnership, you're sharing all along the way, right? Not just at the start, and then there's check-ins along the way. So one of the strategies we're suggesting might be hosting weekly office hours for parents. I don't really think that this could be at the district level, it could be at the classroom level. I mean, instructors are often, they have a website or they have a newsletter or something that they use to communicate with families when they're seeing kids in person. Shifting that a little bit to make it use that same familiar strategy of keeping in touch, but there might be new things that you address in that, and what we're calling office hours, just to make sure you're checking in with those families to find out whatever challenges they're having, whether it's technology or something else, economic issues that families are facing now they weren't before. It's an opportunity to cheer them on and remind them of what their role is and what they're not expected to have to address for their child's education, to support them as they do things like keeping an eye on deadlines and do their, fulfill their roles at home. Did you want to add anything, Rhoda?
I know you all do this anyway. Probably you would had an electronic backpack with questions that went home, but it behooves us all to remember that right now, sending conversation starters home about content can help parents convey their respect for what their students have done and the ownership of that student learning. And of course, it's also an opportunity to teach parents about those open-ended questions rather than, tell me everything you learned today.
Mm-hmm.
But rather the open-ended questions around a topic are really helpful to start to open conversation with a child. And it can be that if you have that that child who naturally wants to teach, that you can ask that 10-year-old, how would you teach what you learned today about plants to a 6-year-old, so that they really have to construct it and think about how they would do that. So involving the child in somehow the retelling or the translation of what the content they just learned to an applied different context is always helpful for parents. Don't necessarily know that.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that could be a real source of joy for parents too, to hear the expertise. I know that's always fun to hear your student be the real expert, is fulfilling.
Right, and just like we said with early childhood programs, if you've got those experiments that you can send home that just make use of, household items as optional, it would be great for a parent to do that on the weekend with their students. So just remembering those things and remembering always the kinds of questions that a parent may not have those open-ended question skills. So any opportunity to remind them that that asking a child if this relates to anything else they've thought about or knew about is better than asking them what 2 + 2 is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. And we do have, we wanted to leave a few minutes for questions, but we do on our, I want to just go to this last page here, where we have some research-based resources, and those are also shared on our tip sheet if instructors want to reference that. But we do get into a little bit more detail about how you might go about, using parent groups and, doing that upfront training, and also the ongoing office hours strategies in our tip sheet. So
that's in your handout section and the go-to
right.
webinar control panel. And of course, these are just helpful for parents, to continue to know that it could be dumped into the course, that if you do have a course that's there for parents, so that they remember what their role is. So, Alan, are there questions?
Yes, we've got quite a few questions that have been coming in. Appreciate everybody's participation in the presentation, and thanks, Rhoda and Beth, for the information you've given so far. This one comes from Deborah. She says, how do we handle parents that will not respond to the teacher and become the roadblock to helping the child have learning time at home?
Now, because of the original question on what if there aren't electronic devices, I definitely would make sure that I've tried to reach the parent in various ways, so that it's not just I've emailed 3 times and I'm getting no response. I think particularly at this time, what's worrying about that is that it may be the parent is struggling themselves with a life issue we just don't know about. So reaching out as concern for the parent rather than for the child even is really helpful. And that was a prime key reason why we feel the office hours are good, so that you can also learn information about where the parent's at. If none of that works, I'm not sure how many of you are still working with your social worker or counselor. So that, because that seems to me it could be an issue for that family beyond instruction in the classroom. So involving administrators and the counseling staff is, I think, very helpful in that instance. Beth?
Yeah, another approach might be to, I wouldn't say deputize other parents, but to really use the parent volunteer groups that are already a part of your landscape at your school. Those volunteer people, I mean, that's still their attitude. They still want to help, right? So they're going to need different kinds of guidance from the school to be effective than maybe they've needed before. Maybe you needed them to do different things in the past, but now if you give them good messaging, you have to be clear with them. Like if you want them to, whether it's like the Facebook page for the PTO or, social media outlets, or it's the group itself has a method of communicating internally, maybe using the other parents to reach out, with giving them support and guidance, like literally, talking points, checklist kind of thing to say. That might be lower the barrier a little bit if a family is feeling intimidated or frustrated by the school, or the school represents something difficult for them. Then maybe another parent might be able to be the conduit to bring, just to be a liaison and bring the resources to bear that family's going to need in order to get out of the way, to not be a roadblock.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for that. Kelly says, I'm going to teach kindergarten summer school, and I do not know these children. What is the best way to engage these students?
I would say play. How about you, Rhoda? Like make it clear that this is going to be a playful place, even if it is online. And the way you represent your activities, I mean, involve the parents certainly, because you're not going to have little ones logging on independently, but make it clear to the parents that you're going to be helping with academic skills through play, and that which would be happening in your classroom anyway, but they may not have that notion. They may not have that idea that this is going to be okay. It's going to be fun, and we are going to learn, and we're going to play while we do it. So I guess putting that headline up there first is the way to start.
Mm-hmm. And we will have on our website a guided play webinar that we recorded on the weekend, and and there are some articles associated with that on guided play that we'd be happy to share with Arlen for everyone.
Wonderful, that's fantastic. Tanya asks, how do we get a copy of the How to Manage a Meltdown information?
Oh, well, the author of that is a psychologist who did a presentation nearby. I think that her name, Lisa D'Amour, is on there. She's written several books, but I thought, because behavior management might be something, it's not new to parents managing behavior, but they might have different triggers in this online learning environment. So I tossed that in there in case that was, popping up for anyone. So I mean, we can, again, I can provide you with that, or you can follow up. I think her .com, her website is on that little handout, or that little image that I put on the last slide. I can go back to that if that's helpful. drlisadamore.com.
At the bottom.
Yeah, maybe that's all they needed, is for me to go back to that slide.
Excellent, thank you, Beth.
Mm-hmm.
Laura says, any advice for ELL students?
you want to go first, Beth?
Well, just to make sure that when you're doing that initial communication with families, you're making sure that the home language is being used, so that, you know, like everything we said, an effective partnership is going to involve that upfront communication, and that's not going to be effective if you're not providing it in the language. So if you're going to have a course on your learning platform, put it in the languages or provide translations within the course so that everybody can participate and be on the same page.
And yeah, I think that that's really great advice. And also, more than ever, not that you don't already do this every single day, but more than ever to see that ELL student as a person with two languages, with more languages, with not just English, but another language, to see it as a huge asset, and to bring whatever you can of that language to the classroom would be really helpful. And then just finally, if a person, so on some platforms, there are apps, and this goes for students with disabilities as well, but there are apps that will do some translation, and there are also apps that will turn the text into, if there's a text that has to be read, into spoken, a robot speaks it. So if a student who's still developing another language for them, it's easier for them to hear the story rather than to try to read it, using those online apps might be helpful. Or if it's a piece that's, you know, analytical, then same thing, they might be able to hear it better than they can read a lengthy piece. So in whatever ways you can use the online apps, it would be, I think, helpful.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. We've got time for one more question, and then we'll let everybody log out and go about the rest of their afternoon. This one's from Heather. What resources are available for parents to help them learn about technology so they can then help their children?
Well, I would first say that, you know, there's the issue of technology, but then there's the issue of the particular learning management system that you use. And that's what they need to know. They need to navigate their way around whatever the student is using. Now, some districts may not be, using a learning management system. They may be using Google Sheets and Google Docs and Zoom. But if you do have a learning management system, that may have a training module that you can modify for parents or use as is for parents, and a lot of forums. So a lot of so for example, Canvas and Schoology both have forums within them where people are asking questions about how something works. And so directing parents to that, or making an amalgam of some of those frequently asked questions, and still having the module that you learned about the system from might be helpful for parents.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's more about the how-tos, not the bigger understanding of technology, but they really are going to want to focus on how do I, you know, log on? How do I submit assignments? How do I, you know, the specific needs of their learner. In fact, I think sometimes I've had questions from parents and their own technology background, what they do at their office or how they would have designed it to work can get in the way a little bit of what we're expecting on our learning management system, because they have some assumptions. So that doesn't really answer the question, but just to say a very clear trail of breadcrumbs, and also to realize you don't have to reinvent. If Schoology already has some information on how parents can use it, tap into those resources for sure. Or, you know, your technology folks at your district can probably help develop those kinds of resources that are very straightforward for the families.
Mm-hmm.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you, Beth. Thank you, Rhoda, so much for your time. And thanks to all of our participants for logging in with us today. I think we got up to 215 at one point, which is great. Great numbers for you all. I want to remind everyone that this has been recorded and it will be available for archive on edleadersnetwork.org, but I'll also be sending out an email reminding you to access the webinar recording, and even those who weren't able to log in with us will get a link to watch the recording. Just a reminder, there is a handouts pod, and there's a partnering with parents tip sheet that the CTD has developed for us, so make sure to download that before you log out. You are now free to close the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will log you out of the session for today. Thank you, Beth. Thanks, Rhoda.
Thank you,
Thank
Anna.
you. It's a pleasure.